I was reborn on the very day I divorced billionaire CEO Ethan Carter. He slapped the divorce agreement in my face and told me to get out. In my last life, I went mad for him, obsessed to the point of losing myself. And in the end, he and his so-called true love, Sophie White, had me locked in a mental hospital where I died miserably. This time I left. I signed my name and took the astronomical settlement money. Ethan Carter, you think this is the end? No. This is only the beginning of your downfall. Your fortune destroyed. Your reputation in ruins. This is my violent feast of revenge. The sharp sting of disinfectant filled my nose. I jolted awake. What met my eyes wasn't the sterile white ceiling of the asylum, but the familiar yet distant crystal chandelier. Luxurious and cold, like the prison that had trapped me for 3 years. The marital home I once shared with Ethan Carter. Lena, sign it. His voice colder than the light struck me like a blow. I stiffly turned my head and saw the man I had loved and hated for 10 years. Ethan stood tall in a perfectly tailored black suit in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. His figure outlined by the sunlight. His features strikingly handsome, almost godlike. Yet in his eyes was nothing but naked disgust and impatience. He was holding a document, the divorce agreement. I froze. This wasn't the moment before my death. I had died strapped to a hospital bed, forcibly injected with sedatives until my heart failed. Just before the end, I overheard nurses gossiping that Ethan had finally married his beloved Sophie White in a grand wedding of the century, while I, his malicious ex-wife, had become the laughingstock of the entire city. So I had been reborn. I was back 3 years ago on the very day of my divorce from Ethan Carter. On this same day in my past life, I had acted like a lunatic, screaming and clinging to his leg, refusing to let go, ripping the divorce papers apart, and using every degrading trick I could think of to beg him not to abandon me. But all I received was his deeper disgust and the words, "You really make me sick." Then the bodyguards dragged me out of the villa like trash. From that day on, my life plummeted. Out of revenge, I committed countless foolish acts against Sophie, yet Ethan effortlessly diffused each one, making me look even more vicious and pathetic. In the end, he lost all patience and, claiming I was mentally unstable personally, sent me to that living hell. An ocean of regret and agony drowned me. For a man who never loved me, I had turned my life into a complete tragedy, a vicious supporting role for others' entertainment. How laughable. Lena, what trick are you playing now? Ethan's brows knitted tighter when I didn't respond. My patience is limited. Slowly, I sat up straight on the sofa, my gaze shifting from his cold, chiseled face to the divorce agreement. My heart pounded wildly in my chest, not from grief, but from an indescribable near-death ecstasy. Heaven had granted me another chance. This time, I wouldn't be a fool. Love, devotion, to hell with it all. I wanted only revenge. I would return every humiliation and every ounce of pain I had endured in my last life to Ethan Carter and Sophie White, 100-fold, 1,000-fold. The thought of vengeance didn't just mean clever schemes and strategy. No, my mind roared with the need for raw, brutal force. Plans and logic were too slow. What I wanted was absolute crushing power. I took a deep breath, forced down the storm of emotions inside me, and twisted my lips into a smile uglier than tears. My hoarse voice broke the silence. Fine. Ethan clearly hadn't expected me to agree so easily. For an instant, surprise flashed in his eyes before coldness returned. He must have thought this was another one of my manipulative games. He tossed the papers and a pen onto the coffee table. The papers made a crisp snap as they landed, as if urging this piece of trash to be swept away. I didn't look at him. My hand trembled as I reached for the agreement. In my last life, I hadn't even read it. I tore it up on the spot. This time I read it word by word. The contract was simple. Ethan Carter, true to his status as a top businessman, had calculated everything down to the last cent. I was listed as the at-fault party, though I didn't know what I was supposed to have done wrong, and I would leave with nothing but the clothes on my back. In his mercy, he gave me a shabby ancestral house from an old family friend and $1 million as severance. $1 million was an insult next to his billions, practically pocket change. As I reached the end, My eyes caught a line of fine print in the supplementary clause. As compensation, 3% of Fenwa Entertainment, a subsidiary under the Fuji Group, would be transferred to my name. I froze. In my last life, I never noticed that clause because I was frantic and never actually read the agreement. Fenwa Entertainment was the dullest of Fuji Group's many subsidiaries, years of losses, half dead. Ethan had been meaning to offload it for a long time. To him, that 3% was probably as worthless as the million, scraps to toss to a beggar. Only someone like me, reborn with knowledge from the future, knew that 6 months later, Fenwa would soar because of a breakout web drama called Above the Sky. Its stock would multiply by hundreds, and the drama's investment would soon be snapped up by a mysterious, far-sighted investor. My opportunity was now sitting in front of me, an avenging blade handed to me by fate. I picked up the pen and, almost without hesitation, signed my name at the end of the agreement. Lena, my handwriting was a little crooked because my hands shook. Not from fear, but from extreme excitement. I pushed the contract back to Ethan, and for the first time since this life began, looked at him calmly and clearly. Pleasure doing business. I hope we never see each other again. Ethan studied me with a look of curiosity and appraisal, as if meeting me for the first time. He'd likely never seen me so composed and rational. In every script of my past life, I'd been the hysterical, useless fool who existed for no reason but loving him. Good. He folded the agreement, turned away coldly, and said, "You have 3 days to move out." Then he strode off without a trace of regret. The front door slammed shut like a divider between two worlds. I collapsed onto the sofa, gasping, and finally let the tears fall. Tears not of sorrow, but of rebirth. Ethan Carter, Sophie White, the game is only just beginning. I pulled out my phone and called a distant cousin who had helped me only after I went bankrupt in my last life. He was a capable financial operator who had simply been unlucky and never met his break. "Cousin, it's Lena. I need your help right now. I have some money and a chip that's about to be worth a fortune." My voice was calm and resolute, filled with an authority that allowed no doubt. The first step of revenge was to turn the trash Ethan threw at me into the sharpest blade aimed at his heart. The second was to make this divorce settlement the start of a violent crushing. 3 days later, I stood on the villa's doorstep, on time, dragging the suitcase. Ethan's butler, Mr. Wang, looked at me with pity and distance in his eyes. "Miss Lin, the car is ready." "Thank you, Mr. Wang." I nodded politely. In these 3 years, Mr. Bat Wang had been one of the few in this house who hadn't treated me with cold contempt when I was down and out in my last life. He had secretly helped me before, and I kept that kindness in my heart. I didn't get into the luxury car set by his family. Instead, I hailed a ride-share straight for the financial district downtown. All I owned was one suitcase of clothes, a bank card holding the 1 million and the newly executed proof of the equity transfer. In a cafe, I met my cousin Mark Lin. He looked haggard, heavy dark circles under his eyes. Clearly things had not been going well for him lately. When he saw me, he was surprised. "So you and the vice president are divorced." I got straight to the point and pushed a document toward him. "Cousin, this is my entire stake, and it's your chance." Mark picked up the paper. When he saw the 3% stake in Funwa Entertainment, his brow tightened. "Don't be stupid. Ethan Carter is humiliating you. Benoit is a bottomless pit. This stake is worthless, maybe even negative." "Not now," I said, looking him dead in the eyes and speaking deliberately, each word clear. "I need you to use that 1 million plus every contact and bit of capital you can mobilize to lever us up in Short Voyage Tech, a Fuji Group affiliate." Mark went pale. "Are you crazy? Shorting Voyage Tech. It's their flagship AI project this year. Its stock is on a tear. Our money would be a drop in the ocean. It would be swallowed instantly. 3 days from now, Voyage Tech will be hit by a scandal. Its core technology will be exposed as plagiarized. The founder will be forced to resign, and the stock will hit 3 consecutive limit-down days." My voice was quiet, but carried an unnerving certainty. I'd seen this in financial news in my last life, and I'd been too wrapped up in Ethan to care about business. Now that knowledge was my most powerful weapon. Mark stared at me, trying to find any hint of a joke or madness on my face, but all he saw was cold resolve. How? How do you know? He asked hoarsely. You don't need to know how I know, I cut in. This is our only chance. If it works, we get the seed money for revenge. If it fails, I'm back where I started. Nothing to lose. My words hit Mark like a hammer. He looked at me, the cousin who used to chase after men, naive and foolish, and in what felt like an instant I'd been reborn into someone else. After a long silence, he suddenly slammed his palm on the table. Fine, I've always hated those Wall Street elites who come back acting superior anyway. If we lose, worst case, I'll beg under a bridge with you. I smiled. This time I had chosen the right ally. The next 3 days were the most thrilling of my life. Mark proved himself a born trader. He used my 1 million as margin, and through a maze of complex operations and channels, built a short position worth 50 million. It was like walking a tightrope above a cliff. Any tremor and we'd be crushed. On the afternoon of the third day at 2 o'clock with 1 hour left before the market closed, our account had already bled into the danger zone because Voyage Text price kept rising. We were on the brink of forced liquidation. Mark's shirt was soaked with sweat, and his eyes bloodshot as he stared at the screen. Half an hour left. If there's no news in that time, we're finished. His voice was trembling. My fingers whitened around my coffee cup, but my face stayed calm. I was betting that my memory had not failed me. That fate had not veered from the path. At 2:45 p.m., a bold red news pop-up detonated across the financial world. Breaking, trillion-dollar leader Voyage Text, core algorithm, accused of plagiarizing a Silicon Valley startup. The evidence was conclusive. The moment the news broke, Voyage Text stock plunged like a kite with its string cut, falling vertically at a terrifying speed. It fell. It really fell. Mark nearly jumped out of his seat in excitement, as the green K line on the screen cascaded down like a magnificent waterfall. Our account balance flipped from bloody red into green, and then rocketed upward at a furious pace. And by the last minute before the close, the stock was nailed to the daily limit down. We had won. Mark collapsed back into his chair, speechless for a long time. I stared at the long string of numbers in our account. 50 million in principal, amplified by leverage and the crash, had yielded us nearly 200 million in net profit. This was my billion-dollar divorce settlement. Ethan Carter had shrugged me off with 1 million and a pile of worthless papers, and I had used his mercy to tear the first piece of flesh from him. The thrill of it was more intoxicating than any false intimacy I'd experienced in my last life. Lena, what are you? Mark finally stammered, looking at me as if I were a monster. Cousin, this is only the beginning, I said, standing and patting his shoulder. Now that we have money, the next step is to acquire Fenwa, but you already have 3%. It's not enough, he protested. Not enough, I said coldly. I want 100% control. I want this blade entirely in my own hand. At this moment, Ethan was probably tearing his hair out over the Voyage Text scandal. He would never imagine that the trash he discarded had quietly become a starving wolf holding 200 million in cash, eyeing the weakest link in his empire. He would not suspect this was only the start. I didn't want merely to slap his face or make him regret it. I wanted a total violent economic crushing. I wanted to watch the commercial empire he built collapse piece by piece under my hands until he had nothing. With funding, everything became simple. Fenwa Entertainment had always been a marginal asset of the Fuji Group, years of losses, and shareholders had long wanted to offload it. I instructed Mark to anonymously issue a cash takeover offer at a price 20% above market. We encountered almost no resistance. Small shareholders, seeing the premium, scrambled to sell their junk shares as if they'd found a savior. The only potential obstacle was Ethan himself. Though he looked down on Fenwa as the absolute controller of the Fuji Group, any major change in a subsidiary's equity required his sign-off. I had Mark deliberately submit the acquisition proposal on the same day Ethan had to deal with the Voyage Tech mess. As expected, the overwhelmed Ethan only glanced at the proposal, saw that a premium buyout might recover some losses for the group, and signed off in a single stroke. He didn't even bother to investigate who the anonymous buyer was. To him, it was just another scrap of paper filed away while dealing with trash. A week later, when Mark placed a brand new document in front of me, I officially became the sole 100% owner of Fenwa Entertainment. I renamed the company Phoenix Entertainment. Standing in Phoenix Entertainment's tired CEO office, I looked around. Everything exuded decay, employees listless and dead-eyed, but I knew this would be where my empire rose. The first thing I did was call an all-staff meeting. When I entered the conference room in a business suit and heels, everyone froze. Some recognized me as Ethan Carter's infamous dumped wife. Is that Lena? How could she be here? She bought the company. This is a joke. The company was already toast. Now some clueless woman's running it. We should find a buyer fast. Mutters of derision and laughter rose up. Contemplate like knives aimed at me. Expressionless, I walked to the head of the table and slammed a document down. And today on, my name is Lena, and I am the CEO of Phoenix Entertainment. I know what you're thinking, that I'm just a trophy who rode on a man's coattails, an ignorant outsider who knows nothing about this business. I paused, my gaze cutting sharply across every face in the room. So I'll give you a chance, and I'll give myself a chance. This is a list of the company's current projects and each of your personnel files. Now you may speak freely and tell me why this company has become what it is today. The conference room fell silent. A middle-aged man in black-rimmed glasses, who looked rather seasoned, stood. His name was Charles Zhang, and he was the company's project director. Miss Lena, forgive my bluntness, he said. The company's biggest problem is it has no money, no resources, and no good projects. The scripts we hold are the leftovers others have refused. Id or third-tier material, the actors are nobodies who can't carry anything. Even the Fuji Group's yearly allocations barely keep basic operations afloat. His words voiced what everyone thought I nodded. So the second thing I would do was fix those problems. I looked at Mark. At my signal, he projected a PowerPoint I'd long prepared onto the big screen. I will inject $500 million into the company, like I announced. The whole conference room exploded. $500 million, an astronomical sum for a dying Fenwa, sounded insane. Everyone stared at me like I'd lost my mind. They couldn't believe that the woman Ethan Carter had discarded could produce $500 million in cash. This $500 million will be spent on 3 areas. I continued, ignoring their shock. First, we will establish an S-level film and TV project. I've already chosen the script above the sky. After Zhang, you will have full authority on this project. The budget is unlimited. I pushed a printed treatment across to Charles. His hand trembled as he took it, and after a single glance, his eyes lit up. Second, we'll form a new economics and talent department led by top agent Miss Kim. I will hand you a list. Spare no expense to sign the people on it, no matter which company currently holds them. The breach penalties are on me. By Miss Kim, I meant the legendary agent who in my last life had launched 3 Best Actor winners and 1 Best Actress, though she's been shelved recently for offending the wrong people. The names on my list were once megastars in my last life, who, for whatever reason, hadn't yet risen in this timeline. Third, all employee salaries will be doubled, with project bonuses calculated separately. If the first 2 are pie in the sky promises, the third is real, immediate fuel. The room shifted from dead silence to boiling excitement. Eyes that had been full of contempt now burned with eagerness and hunger. In the simplest, most violent way, I'd sealed loyalty in the shortest time, because I understood that for people who'd struggled at the bottom for so long, real money beats empty promises. After the meeting, Ethan's call came in. I looked at his familiar name on the screen and curled a mocking smile as I answered. Lena, is that you? His voice was stuffed with suppressed anger and disbelief. You bought Fenwa, he said. Vice President team's good tabs. I laughed lightly, casual as if discussing the weather. From now on, you should call me President Lin. Oh, and one more thing. I renamed it Phoenix Entertainment. Dead silence on the other end. I could almost picture Ethan's sullen face dark enough to drip water. He'd never have expected that the garbage he tossed aside would so quickly take on a shape he couldn't understand. He couldn't imagine where I'd gotten so much money. Where did your money come from? He finally asked. His voice was cold as ice. That's not for the vice president to worry about, I replied. Perhaps I should thank you. The 1 million divorce settlement was quite handy. I said it to needle him on purpose. Lena, what on earth are you trying to do? What I was born to do, I replied coolly. Vice President, have you forgotten we're divorced? What I do is none of your business. I'm just running my company and handling my business. You better not try any tricks. Or what? I cut him off, my voice instantly turning cold. Ethan Carter, put away that CEO act. You're in no position to threaten me anymore. Take care of your voyage tech. Take care of your darling Sophie and stop bothering me. With that, I hung up on him. The busy tone in my ear filled me with a surge of satisfaction. Ethan, this is only the beginning. You're feeling anger. You're feeling out of control. Good. Next, I'll make you taste even more helplessness, despair, and pain. The second step of my crushing counterattack was to build an empire in the field he knew best, in the way he most despised, when he could never hope to match. Phoenix Entertainment's reforms burned like a wildfire. The $500 million cash injection was a shot of pure adrenaline that jolted the entire company back to life. Charles Zhang took the script for Above the Sky and led his team on a nationwide search for the best director and actors. Miss Kim, with my list and deep funding, successfully signed several potential stars who would one day become the industry's top names. And I became the biggest mystery in the city's high society. Ethan wanted to know which new patron this abandoned wife had latched on to be making such moves. Ethan Carter sent people to investigate me, but Mark had already covered every track. All the money trails pointed to a fictitious overseas investor, clean, flawless, no cracks defined. The more Ethan failed to discover, the more restless he became. That restlessness reached its peak a month later at a charity gala. The event drew almost every notable figure in the city. Of course, Ethan was there. At his side was his cherished Sophie White. Sophie wore a white evening gown and delicate understated makeup, looking as pure as a lily untouched by dust. She held Ethan's arm while receiving the crowd's blessings and admiration. They looked the picture of a perfect couple, heaven made. In my last life, this was the night I completely lost control. I'd stormed up and doused Sophie, with Red One screaming that she was a shameless mistress. Ethan had slapped me across the face in public, and I'd become a citywide laughingstock, a crazy, pathetic ex-wife. This time, when I entered the ballroom as the president of Phoenix Entertainment, invitation in hand, every gaze shifted to me. I wore a sleek scarlet gown that made me radiant, my presence filling the room. My face carried a poised, distant smile, worlds apart from the disheveled, humiliated woman of a month ago. Ethan's eyes locked onto me immediately. His expression, a dense fog of shock, curiosity, and a flicker of admiration, he probably didn't even recognize. Beside him, Sophie's face went a shade paler when she saw me, though she quickly resumed her pitifully delicate look and leaned softly against Ethan, murmuring just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Ethan, Lena seems so different now. Her voice was innocent and worried, as though I were the one who might hurt her. Ah, same old green tea tactics. I ignored them completely and moved straight toward a circle of renowned directors and producers, greeting them and exchanging cards. My conversation, my insight, and the $500 million investment plan behind Phoenix Entertainment quickly made me the center of the gala. Ethan was left on the sidelines, his face darkening. He was used to being the focus of every room, used to me orbiting him like a satellite. But now, I didn't even glance his way. I had stolen all of his spotlight, and that loss of control made him sieve. At last, Sophie White couldn't hold back. She took a champagne flute and glided toward me, her face wearing a sweet, harmless smile. Lena, it's been so long. I'm truly happy for you, seeing how well you're doing now. She raised her glass, looking for all the world as though she sincerely wished me well. Around us, heads turned. I wanted to watch the scene of the ex-wife and the white moonlight colliding in public. I swirled the red wine in my glass, giving her a half smile. Then I really should thank you and Vice President Carter for kicking me out of that cage. Sophie's smile froze for an instant before she softened again, looking even more delicate. Lena, don't say that. Ethan and I both hope you're happy. Are you still blaming us? Her eyes reddened as she spoke, as if I'd just bullied her with cruel words. A true expert, just a few sentences, and she had placed herself in the victim's role. In my last life, by now I would have been furious, stomping my feet, hurling insults without thinking. But this time I only smiled lightly. Blame you? Why would I blame you? I asked in mock surprise. I should be thanking you. If Vice President Carter hadn't cut his losses and kicked out an unqualified stand-in like me, how would you, the real one, ever have gotten what you wanted? I'd bit hard on the word stand-in. Sophie's face went chalk white in an instant, and a muffled gasp parapoled through the crowd. Everyone knew I resembled Ethan's first love, the one who had died young Sophie's own sister. It was whispered that Ethan had married me because I was just a substitute, but no one had ever dared to say it aloud. Now I, the person in question, had shattered the paper screen myself. You? What nonsense are you talking? Sophie stammered, instinctively trying to refute me. I raised an eyebrow, leaned in close enough so only she could hear, and whispered. Sophie, did you really think what you did was seamless? 3 years ago, when your sister had that car accident, where were you? Why didn't you pick up her last desperate call? Were you hoping she'd die so you could take her place at Ethan's side? Each word was a poison blade plunging into her heart. She shuddered violently, her pupils contracting, staring at me with terror and disbelief as if I were a demon crawling out of hell. These were the secrets she had buried deepest. How could I possibly know? In my last life, I'd learned the truth only on my deathbed, from a nurse Sophie had also set up. Sophie White wasn't the pure lily she pretended to be, but a carnivorous flower who had climbed up over her sister's death. You, she pointed at me, lip trembling, unable to form a word. Did I hit a nerve? I stepped back, putting space between us again, my smile turning cold and mocking. Oh, and I almost forgot to tell you, your sister's diary. I think I happened to pick it up. Of course the diary was fake, a bluff, but Sophie didn't know that. She broke completely. Her mind stuck on that one word, diary. Like a cat whose tail had been stepped on, she shrieked and suddenly flung the champagne in her hand straight at me. You lunatic liar. The scene was eerily familiar, except this time the roles were reversed. I'd anticipated it. With a slight turn of my body, the golden liquid missed me perfectly and splashed all over Ethan Carter, who had just arrived to rescue Sophie. The entire room fell silent. The scene left everyone dumbfounded. Ethan Carter hung his head, staring at the dark wine stains soaking his expensive suit. His face is black as the bottom of a pan. Sophie, the moment she flung the drink, immediately regretted it. She looked between Ethan and the hostel, shocked gazes around them, and realized in an instant what she had done. The pure, innocent image she had spent years cultivating was destroyed in one moment. Chang, I didn't mean to. It's he provoked me. Sophie stammered, panic rising as tears poured down her face. I stood to the side like an outsider watching a farce, and in what might pass for kindness, I offered a tissue with a smile. Miss Sophie, your emotions seem unstable. Maybe you should see a doctor. I know a good psychiatrist. Want me to introduce you? The words hit Ethan and Sophie like a resounding slap, because everyone knew who had recently been sent to a psychiatric hospital. It was me. Ethan's head snapped up, and for the first time those hawk-like eyes of his showed scrutiny and doubt, not aimed at the cameras, but at the tear-streaked Sophie in his arms. He wasn't an idiot. Tonight had been too abnormal. I was composed, cultured, and poised, while the always gentle Sophie had lost control and behaved hysterically. Thus, a seed of suspicion was planted. That was precisely the effect I wanted. I no longer looked back. Turning away amid many meaningful glances, I exited the gala with grace. Ethan Carter, Sophie White. Are you satisfied with this public slap in the face? Don't be in a hurry. This is only the appetizer. The real, brutal crushing is coming. The charity gala scandal was the top headline in our circles the next day, although connections and pressure damp and media coverage in a society with no real secrets, Sophie's true image and my mysterious return spread everywhere. A huge rift formed between Ethan and Sophie, but I had no time to savor it. My revenge plan had entered its most critical phase. Production on Above the Sky had begun. I had gambled nearly all of Phoenix Entertainment's liquid assets on this project. I hired the country's top film director for a web drama, engaged the best VFX team, and spared no detail in preparation. Everyone thought I was insane, burning money, but only I knew the tidal wave this drama would unleash once it aired. Meanwhile, Mark used our remaining funds to quietly build an even bigger, shorting matrix against the Fuji Group in the financial market. This time our target was the Fuji Group's core industry, real estate. I clearly remembered that in my last life, 3 months later, the government issued a major housing regulation called the strictest purchase restriction in history, and every highly leveraged real estate company was devastated. Fuji Group was among the most highly leveraged. Keithan had no idea. He was still steeped in his commercial empire, dealing with Voyage tech's fallout, pacifying the unstable Sophie, and keeping an eye on me as if my moves and entertainment were mere women's quarrels. He had no idea that a net was already being woven beneath his feet. 3 months flew by. Above the Sky premiered exclusively on the major streaming platform. Day 1 numbers were mediocre, and the company panicked, but I remained calm and ordered the marketing team to stick to the plan. Day 2 the numbers climbed. Day 3 word of mouth began to ferment. Organic recommendations went viral across social platforms. By the end of the first week, Above the Sky swept every chart like an unstoppable force and became the year's phenomenon hit. Phoenix Entertainment rose to fame overnight. The company's valuation rocketed from a few $100 million to $5 billion and kept climbing. The name Lena Lind. I completely shook off the label of Ethan Carter's ex-wife and became the hottest new tycoon in business. A self-made, sharp-eyed, legendary female CEO. And on that weekend, when Above the Sky reached its peak, the other boot finally dropped. The government abruptly announced the strictest purchase restriction policy in history. The moment the news broke, real estate stocks crashed across the board. Red was everywhere. The Fuji Group's backbone was torn down violently. In the first trading day, its shares hit the limit down at the open. The second day, they hit limit down again. The third day was the same inevitable plunge. In just 3 days, Fuji Group's market value evaporated by nearly $100 billion. Panic spread through the group. Banks bombarded them with collection calls, and partners pulled out. An unprecedented crisis pinned Ethan Carter, the king of industry, on the edge of a cliff. While our team, short at the top, filled our pockets to overflowing. This time, we not only recouped all our earlier costs, we accumulated terrifying capital enough to confront Fuji Group head-on. In the office, Mark trembled with excitement as he stared at the dazzling string of numbers in our account. "We did it. We actually destabilized that behemoth," he breathed. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the city's financial center with a calm, flat gaze. "This isn't enough," I said coldly. "I want him completely down." At that moment my private phone rang, an unknown number. I answered. On the line came a voice both familiar and strangely hoarse with fatigue. "Ethan, Lena, where are you? Let's meet." His tone was no longer commanding. There was a hint of negotiation in it. I smiled. "Ethan Carter, have you finally bowed that proud head of yours? Vice President so busy. How do you have time to see someone like me?" I asked, feigning innocence. There was a pause on the other end as he tried to control his emotions. "I want to buy the secondary streaming rights for Above the Sky and the subsequent IP development rights. Name your price." My sneer deepened. Fuji Group had film subsidiaries too, but they'd had a dismal year. My hit drama was the only lifeline left that could prove to the market and shareholders the group still had earning power. He wanted to buy salvation with money. "Vice President, do you think I'm short of cash now?" I asked lightly. His restraint broke and anger crept into his voice. "What do you want? Isn't all this just revenge against me?" "Fine. I admit I was cruel to you before." He tried. "Name one condition. If I can do it, I'll agree to it." His apology sounded to me like the world's worst joke. In my last life, when I was locked in a psychiatric ward, tortured, and unable to seek life or death, where was he? He was enjoying the world's blessings with his white moonlight. Would one flippant apology erase every wound? My voice went icy. each word pulled from a cellar of ice. Do you think I did all this for your apology, or to make you regret it? No. You're wrong. I did it because I want to see you suffer. I want you to have nothing. I want to see you kneel before me like a dog begging for mercy. The rights to Above the Sky, I won't sell them. Not only will I not sell them, I will launch the film adaptation, the sequels, the game adaptations. I will use them to earn tens of billions in profit. And I will use that money to buy up Fuji Group's shares, delivering the deadliest blow when you are at your weakest. So, Ethan Carter, put away those ridiculous conditions. What you can do now is wash your neck and wait for me to tear down everything you built, piece by piece. After I finished speaking, I hung up and blacklisted the number. The sunset outside the window was pale as snow. I knew Ethan must be holding his phone right then, tasting the despair I just handed him. It felt good. The third step of my violent crushing wasn't only to beat you in the field you excel at, it was to snuff out your final hope when you had nowhere left to turn. My declaration of war infuriated Ethan Carter. Like a trapped beast, he began to throw every resource he had into a frantic counterattack. He tried to poach people from Phoenix Entertainment, but found my core team already bound tightly to me, with equity and industry-leading compensation. No one could be shaken loose. He tried to strike at us in the capital markets, but our capital flowed like mercury everywhere at once, leaving no opening. Mark, that financial genius, had built an indestructible firewall for me. He even began to resort to unsavory measures, sending people to harass my family and manufacturing negative press about me. But all of this played into my plans. I had already protected my family, and whatever so-called dirt they tried to dig up was a joke in front of Phoenix Entertainment's powerful PR machine. In the public eye, my image had long since become that of an independent, formidable woman who had survived repeated attacks and refused to fall. Each of Ethan's assaults landed like a punch on cotton. No damage to me, and only worsening his own situation. His struggles looked pathetic and pitiful to me. He had become a puppet dancing to my tune, every step within my calculation. The true showdown came a month later. Because Fuji's shares had plunged continuously, they triggered market value maintenance clauses in agreements with multiple banks, facing huge calls for additional collateral and accelerated repayment. Ethan's only option was to raise $30 billion in cash within a week. Otherwise, the banks would have the right to enforce on his equity. And Fuji Group would risk being broken up or even collapsing. He started frantically selling assets and contacting any ally who might help. But those who once fraternized with him now avoided him like a plague. That was when I struck. I had Mark, on behalf of Phoenix Capital, by newly formed investment vehicle, announced to the market that we would spend $30 billion to acquire Fuji Group's floating shares and toxic assets. The news was a bomb that shattered Ethan's last hope. My move sent a clear signal to the market. Fuji Group was finished, and I was the vulture ready to pick the carcass. Shareholders panicked and began selling en masse to avoid being stuck with falling stock, and Fuji's backbone collapsed again in a bloodbath. The night before the final blow, I received an unexpected call from Sophie White. Her voice was no longer fragile and pitiful. It was full of venom and hysteria. "Lena, you bitch. What do you think you're doing? You ruined Chegan. You ruined everything for me. I'll ruin everything for you." I sneered. "Isn't everything you have stolen from your sister?" She spat. "You liar. My sister did it willingly. She knew Chegan loved you." "Oh, really?" I replied coolly. "Did I die or I mentioned? I've handed it to the police. The truth about your sister's accident will come out soon. Sophie, you should be worried not about Ethan, but about whether you'll spend the rest of your life behind bars." I was bluffing. There was no diary, but a guilty thief's mind is fragile, and that was enough. On the other end came Sophie's scream of collapse, then a deathly silence. I knew she was finished. The next day was Ethan Carter's final fundraising deadline. I sat in Phoenix Capital's top-floor office, watching the huge screen as Fuji Group's backbone after the market opened, plummeted like a free fall, shattering everyone's psychological defenses. At 10 in the morning, my secretary knocked and came in. "Miss Lynn, Ethan Carter is here." "No appointment." He says he wants to see you. I spun the executive chair to look at the pale, tranquil sky outside the window. Let him in. A few minutes later, the office door opened and Ethan walked in. He was no longer the arrogant, high and mighty business emperor. His suit was rumpled, his hair disheveled, deep hollows rimmed with red in his eyes. In a matter of months, he looked 10 years older. He stood in front of my desk, staring at me with eyes full of bloodshot hatred and a regret I couldn't read. Lena, you've won, he said, his voice hoarse like sandpaper. I said nothing. Simply watched him. Suddenly, he dropped to his knees. This man who had once been unbearably proud, the one I had admired for 10 years, now knelt before me. I beg you, spare Fuji, his forehead pressed to the cold floor, his voice breaking with plea. I will transfer every share I personally hold to you free of charge. Just give Fuji a way out. Give those tens of thousands of employees a way out. I looked at his groveling posture with no ripple of feeling and not the slightest pleasure, only a deep irony. In my last life, I had knelt and begged him like that. Begged him not to abandon me, begged him to look at me. How did he spoken then? Lena, you're so pathetic. I returned his exact words verbatim. Ethan Carter, you're pathetic. I stood and walked to him looking down. Do you think I did all this for your shares? For the Fuji Group? No, I did it to see you like this, to see you kneel before me like a dog. As for those employees, you suddenly remember, huh? I scoff. Why didn't you think of them when you sacrificed other subsidiaries to save Voyage Tech? Why didn't you think of them when you used group resources to crush me to please your beloved Sophie? Ethan, you've always been a selfish bastard. Your empire, built on others' suffering, was doomed the moment it was erected. He lifted his head and looked at me. The last glimmer in his eyes died out. Lena, he murmured my name as if searching my face for traces of the woman who loved him to madness. But she was gone, dead in the psychiatric hospital. The game was over. I picked up the phone on my desk and dialed Mark. Begin the final step of acquiring Fuji, I said. In front of Ethan, I gave the order that closed the deal. He slumped to the floor like a statue, stripped of its soul. Sunlight outside was blinding. My revenge ended with the most thorough, most violent crushing imaginable. I didn't become a better person to make him regret. I became a colder, stronger villain and personally dragged him and everything he had into hell. That was the revenge ending I wanted. 6 months later, as the absolute controlling shareholder, I completed the restructuring of the Fuji Group. He was folded into the map of my Phoenix empire. I became the youngest woman on the Forbes list and the world's most talked about business queen, a self-made legend with a ruthless eye for opportunity. Ethan Carter, by contrast, vanished from public life. Word was that after leaving with nothing, he moved into the shabby ancestral flat I'd once been given. And without money or power, he was less than an ordinary man. Sophie White's fate was even worse. Accused of indirect intentional homicide, after the truth about her sister's car accident was exposed by a guilt-ridden informant, she was sentenced to prison. She went mentally unstable behind bars and was eventually sent to the same psychiatric hospital I had once been confined in. It was a perfect circle of karma. One day I was in the office sorting through files when Mark came in. This was taken by someone on the ground, he said, handing me a photo. In the picture, a scraggly, bearded man in tattered clothes was hauling bricks at a construction site. The sunlight turned his back into a gaunt silhouette. It was Ethan. He seemed to be scraping by doing odd jobs. I stared at the photo for a long time, then fed it into the shredder. Don't bring me any more news about him, I said calmly. To me, he's an irrelevant stranger. There's no place for him in my world anymore. I rose and walked to the huge floor-to-ceiling window, looking down over the bustling city at my feet. My new life had only just begun. I was no one's substitute, no one's appendage. I was Lena, the sole queen of this business empire,